episode of the Monarchs Tribunal. And for my first guest, we have a Gamer Looks at 40.
But yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. Again, I hope I set the bar low enough for most others to vault over. That's kind of my goal right now for this appearance. But yeah, man, thanks for having me.
So, for our first episode, I figured I'd go with a topic in which any two old guys would have fun talking about. Chrono
Yeah.
Trigger and Final Fantasy VI.
Ah,
Golden
yes.
era of RPGs.
Really, I mean, it really is the golden era, that Super Nintendo era. It's hard to argue that.
I mean, it's tied with PS2 for just like my favorite era of RPGs.
I think there's something to be said for the simplicity mixed with complexity, if that makes any sense at all, right? It was simple enough for people to understand and for anybody to jump into, but the storytelling and character building was complex enough to keep it interesting and stand the test of time. But PS2 is another one. I mean, that's I wouldn't say toss up. For my money, it'd be the SNES era, Genesis era, but you can make strong arguments for PS2 as well.
I need to go back and play more of those old Genesis RPGs. Like, I had a Genesis, but my local store, like, all the RPGs to rent from were all the Super Nintendo ones. So I had
Right.
none of the Genesis stuff growing up.
Nice. I never had a Genesis either, but I just recently, I think it was this year, played and finished Phantasy Star 4. It's good. It's damn good. It's no Final Fantasy, but it's damn good. Yeah, I gotta dive into more of those Genesis ones as well.
For a slightly more specific what the actual topic is, we're going to get into what is actually the best RPG on the system. And the two games I picked are kind of almost indisputably going to be one of these two.
It's either going to be Final Fantasy VI, of course, or Chrono Trigger. I mean, some people may be too cool for the room and say like Illusion of Gaia or maybe Secret of Mana. You have a lot of Secret of Mana fans out there. But when you get to that echelon, we're talking, giants against giants. It's almost becomes a matter of taste. But yeah, these two are widely regarded as the best on the system, for sure.
I would make the argument that you could possibly throw Breath of Fire 2 on this list for PS3, but that'd be a much harder argument to make.
That would be a very challenging argument. But you could, though. You absolutely could. Breath of Fire 2 is fantastic. Yeah, you definitely could.
I would recommend playing, like, it's one of the only old games I'll recommend this for. Get the fan translation for Breath of Fire 2. Super Nintendo, for smaller studios, it was not kind to translations. It was still true for games like Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy VI, just because the space limitations that we had for English that caused issues. It's why I'm a lot kinder. Problems. Oh yeah, it's why I'm a lot kinder to Ted Woosley, like the Square Enix translator from back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
Because you just didn't have the space. They didn't make these games with the English language in mind, and it takes more space to say stuff in English.
Absolutely. Yep, absolutely. That was a big thing with Phantasy Star 4, where I was researching, how come I can't read any of these magic names? Like, why is it all like Sir and Block? And it turns out it was for memory reasons, right? They had to keep the names of things small to fit as much as possible on the cartridge. So limitations, but sometimes limitations create good things, and I think we can say that about both of these games.
Now, I think both of us kind of agree the answer here is Trigger as the better game.
Yeah.
In quotation marks.
Yes, I would say so. I've gone through this analysis before in other venues, and I've given it a lot of thought. I do think Chrono Trigger is a better game, but not by a landslide, by any stretch of imagination. So it'll be interesting to talk about it.
For any of you who have somehow stumbled on this stream and that you have no idea what either of these two games are, Super Nintendo, for their RPGs, Square Enix was... Well, I think it was just Square at the time, wasn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was just Square.
Later.
Correct.
Yeah,
mm-hmm.
Squaresoft was basically the king of RPGs for the system. 3 great Final Fantasy games, 6 being generally considered the best. Like, some people will say the others are too, but that's beside the point right now.
Mm-hmm.
You had Chrono Trigger, one of their games not made by the main FF team at the time. And I was really sad for Yurt because apparently they didn't get this until years later.
Yeah, it took a while.
But as a brief summary of each game, you have
Basically, the idea, if you want, we could always look at the back of the box and see what the back of the box says about it.
Oh, I
That's
wish
how
I had the back of the box.
I have it right. I have it right here in front of me. If you'd like, I can make this happen.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah. So for Chrono Trigger, remember now, especially back in those days, all you had to go with, or all you had to go on, was the back of the box. So you're in your local video store, you're looking at the SNES games. What's this spiky-haired anime kid? I don't even like anime. You turn the box around and it says the first thing it says is the 32 meg quest begins. That is the first line of the back of the box of Chrono Trigger, because in that era, megs meant everything. 32 meg, big deal. You put that first thing in the back of the box. It reads, the millennium. A portal is opened. The chain of time is broken. A young man is transported into the past, altering the course of history and the outcome of the future. He has to find his way home, but first he must travel to the outer edges of time to repair the world's chronology. On the way, he encounters strange friends and foes, utilizes incredible devices and vehicles, and penetrates and neutralizes the fortresses of the past, present, and future. A paradox has been created. If he does not restore the order of time, nothing will ever be the same. He is the one who will become a hero. He is Chrono. All right.
That is a fantastic box opening.
Pretty strong. So now let's judge it against Final Fantasy VI. I'm gonna read the Final Fantasy III box art. Of course, Final Fantasy VI in Japan was released as Final Fantasy III in the US. It's a little blurred, so I'm gonna try to zoom in a little bit here. Here we go. Final Fantasy III. Magitech has been reborn, and the end of the world is near. Now, no mention of the Megs, no Meg mentions. But that's a pretty strong open. Magitech has been reborn, and the end of the world is near. Ages ago, evil beings created powerful creatures called espers and unleashed them against each other. The resulting battles left their world a smoldering rubble. Legend has it that espers destroyed themselves and most of humanity. Magic disappeared forever. Centuries have passed, and a rational world now exists with espers living only in myths, until one frozen solid since the ancient wars is unearthed. Suddenly, there are reports of magical attacks on civilians. Imperial commandos launch raids using magic-powered Magitech weapons. Magic is obviously alive, and the world is in danger again. Who or what is behind the rediscovery and redeployment of this legendary power? What chaotic plans exist that will wreak havoc on this orderly world? That's it. So I think Chrono Trigger has the better. I think Chrono Trigger, to me, I think has the slightly better box intro. What do you think?
That's a coin flip, I think. Those are both strong.
They're both really strong, but this one, the Chrono Trigger one, I had the benefit of looking at it. The Chrono Trigger one, lots of short sentences. The millennium. A portal is opened. Chain of time is broken. Young man. And the Final Fantasy one is a little more verbose. It's a little more flowy.
Trigger does do a better job at just kind of setting you up for what you're going to be doing.
Yeah, I think it's a slight edge to Chrono Trigger for me on that one. They really did sell it well. So well done in there. So there's your first, the first test here on the Tribunal. Chrono Trigger with the first, the first shot. The first shot.
Now again, since this is the premise, we're pitting these against each other. Inevitably, I think we got to talk about one of the most obvious things. It's just how the games look. I think this has to go to Trigger because I'm always a big proponent that art design is always going to trump graphics. But not only do both of these games have a great art design, but Chrono Trigger does have those like kind of fully fleshed 3D sprites for the system. They move so well. And it's the only game on the system where the battles will take place like on the screen where you encounter the enemies, which is entirely unique for RPGs of that era.
And it was very innovative in that regard, especially because you could see the enemies coming. And I would put that more on gameplay, but I think visually, obviously, both are stunning. It's I think I would agree that Chrono Trigger has maybe slightly better art style because it's more varied. The biomes and just the fact that you are darting back and forth between time periods allows for more expressiveness in its environments because you have your 65 million BC, you have the land of Zeal, right? The land of
Yeah.
Zeal, which is gorgeous. It's one of my favorite songs on the Super Nintendo, full stop, the Zeal theme. You have all these different environments where Final Fantasy is a little more grounded. It's a lot of castles and forests and deserts, but I do think the varying art styles and the varying backgrounds and biomes really lend to more visual flair in Chrono Trigger. So I think Chrono Trigger would win that for me as well. However, I will say, as far as enemies go and character design, Final Fantasy definitely does a few things better. But even with character design, they're just more fleshed out. They're just stronger looking sprites. So I think Chrono Trigger definitely has the edge in visuals.
I will give a bit to Final Fantasy VI on this though. Just some of those final boss designs. Like if that's the only thing we're
Oh,
looking at are the final boss designs. Oh, I'm giving it to Final Fantasy VI.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I actually don't think the final boss of Chrono Trigger is very good at all. I did an article about this many years ago. Final boss of Final Fantasy VI, of course, is Kefka. It's a three-stage Kefka god. Like it's a body in three parts, and then of course the final one is this like celestial being with light, sunlight going through the clouds. It looks amazing. The final boss of Chrono Trigger is a guy in a spacesuit with two radishes in his hand. And like,
Okay,
that's
like,
the guy, huh? That's Lavos?
okay.
Radish Man.
The
Okay.
outer shell of Lavas is fantastic.
Yes.
The second
Yes.
stage, I think, looks great. That third stage
I
is a little goofy.
yeah, I for some reason he's just a Radish Man. But if you're just going off of the final bosses, Final Fantasy does have the edge. And Final Fantasy also at the end feels like a true epic moment, like a true us against the world situation where I really almost wish they had just stopped at Lavos, the shell, right? Or done something else in there. Going inside Lavos, I understand what they were trying to do, but as far as just design effects go, it
Yeah.
didn't quite grab me like Kefka does. But I will say that that Lavos for sure is cool in design externally. Yeah.
That said, I might have a slight bias towards Kefka here. You might have seen my Twitter profile picture when I got a hold of you.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
yeah. I'm the one in here supposedly the one sticking up for Chrono Trigger, and I'm the one who went to a convention as Kefka.
Nice. Very nice. No, and it's good. It's a good Kefka. I mean,
It was okay. I had to make some concessions because I had two different people working on parts of that costume for me.
hmm
They were both Ukraine based when all that went down, so that didn't happen.
Oh boy.
So I kind of ended up
Sure.
with like a store bought costume and wig, which
Sure. Yeah.
I
It's a
don't
bummer.
recommend wearing that in Houston heat during a heat warning.
No. Oh no.
I only stepped outside once during that convention to get something from a food truck, and I'm like, that. I almost had heat stroke. Like, legitimately.
Which convention was it in Houston?
Anime Matsuri last year.
Uh-huh. Okay. Yeah, I know. I've never been, but I know of it. Yeah, I'm in the Austin area, so I go to Classic Game Fest all the time.
Oh, nice. I had to fly out there. I'm down in Idaho.
Cool. But anyway, yeah, man.
But yes.
Well, I know that convention, yeah. But yeah, as far as visuals go too, again, it really depends on what you're there for. Final Fantasy definitely has the more traditional style, but again, I'll give the Chrono Trigger for what we just discussed. Yeah.
Yeah, just art style alone, I'd tie them together. It's one of those
Mhm.
times the graphics give the edge to Trigger.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, where I'm kind of at almost a toss up is the writing.
That's very
But
challenging. Where do you land on that?
at their best, I would put them both at about the same level. The problem comes in with Final Fantasy VI. I think it does have a handful of weak points. The big one I'd highlight is some characters do feel weirdly random or tacked on.
In Final Fantasy 6, you mean?
Six, yes.
Oh yeah, for sure. That's no question. Yeah.
Or you get moments like I love Setzer, and that whole opera scene isn't fantastic. It'll just like for what it's trying to do. But there's no getting around, like, this person with no acting experience with Celis shows up to the opera house, clearly is not a very good actor at the beginning, and somehow by the end of the night puts on this amazing performance. And all this just falls into place for Setzer to kidnap her, thinking she's this other person that's...
It's far-fetched. It's far-fetched. It's interesting how we talk about the opera scene, because the opera house... Can we all agree that it's a big joke, right? Like the opera house is a big joke. It's meant to be funny. Like this is not meant really to be this beautifully intense. A walk and talking octopus is chasing around your characters while it's dropping dumbbells and 16-ton weights on people's heads while a plague of opera goes on below you. It's supposed to be silly. Like it's supposed to be a farce. It's really like this escalating silliness until you get to this emotional point where Celis, I always said Celis, but with Celis is on the balcony doing her part, in that moment is connecting to her real emotions and feelings, as good art will do and as good theater will do. So that moment is still, I think, very touching, but all that stuff around it, it's a big old goofball fest, and it's very funny, and it's very well observed.
Oh, it is. Like, as a whole, I still think it's a great bit. And I know I'm not the only one who would, like, even on that Super Nintendo, try to sing along with those words to the voice. I can't.
Totally. Oh, absolutely. You give it your best shot. You really can't, though, because, again, it was probably written in Japanese and translated, so it doesn't quite fit the meter. Just go, oh.
It almost slots in perfectly.
Almost.
But it's just not quite right.
You're only a faded dream. Like, it's just like, you're just missing it. Just missing the meter.
All this silliness, though, it does surround something that's vital to happen for the story to continue.
Yes, it is all vital for a lot of the emotional weight, and of course the story between
not the
Locke
octopus.
and Celis. Well, no,
the octopus is just a goofy. Be there. Yep.
He's just a silly, goofy character that shows up, makes people laugh.
You kind of needed someone to fight.
Yeah, and why not? Again, in this silly opera scene where you're like, oh, let's try to pull the rug over people's eyes. Is this really Celis? Is this really... What was the girl's name he was looking for?
Maria.
Oh, Maria, thank you. Yeah, is this really Maria? Again, it's all silliness, but it does come to a good conclusion. But as far as writing goes in general, I think it's a bit of a wash because they're so different. I find Chrono Trigger's narrative, I think, is much more straightforward.
It's a lot more focused.
Much more focused. Yeah, it's a very focused, straightforward narrative. And where Final Fantasy VI, it's straightforward until it hits the World of Ruin, and then it's all kind of basically up in the air. It's basically, when you hit the World of Ruin in Final Fantasy VI, you're basically now kind of on your own. It's like a choose-your-own-adventure quest. You're going to now try to get the band back together. You don't have to get everyone together. You find the new characters. Maybe you don't. I think there are some you have to do, but a lot of us choose-your-own-adventure. Your trip up to Lavos in Chrono Trigger has a similar diversion point. You know what I mean? Like, it has a similar point where you lose Chrono, which is a big, your lead character dies, half of the name of the game dies, and you don't have to get him back. And it's a royal pain in the ass to get him back too, by the way. It's not easy to get Chrono back. So yeah, there's these different divergent points, but I think as far as story goes, it really depends on what you want. But I think the writing is equally good across the board. I think the dialogue is good. Maybe the translation is probably a little better in Chrono Trigger, I would think, than Final Fantasy VI.
If we're judging off purely the Super Nintendo versions...
Right, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Final Fantasy VI suffered more than Chrono Trigger did for that translation.
It did. Oh, yeah.
Like,
and
they
fixed
both
it in subsequent...
But...
Yeah, they fixed Chrono Trigger in subsequent... But yeah, I think writing, I think it's... I think Chrono Trigger would have maybe a slight edge, but yeah, for me it's a wash, honestly. I can't really advocate too hard one way or the other.
Yeah, we're kind of already at the point... I'm having to get a little nitpicky to pick one over the other.
Mm-hmm.
That's how good both of these games were.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, just because it's a bit tighter focus, I think Chrono Trigger gets the edge here. I don't say that with a lot of conviction, though.
I'll say Final Fantasy just to make it equal. How's that sound? That way those two sides wash and...
Again, talking story visuals, we are talking about a video game here. How are we rating the gameplay of these two?
It's so hard. It's so hard because they're so different. we probably should define our terms a bit as well. Like when you mean gameplay, are we talking about mechanics and systems? Are we talking about control? Because obviously you control. Are we talking about how the UI functions? Like I guess because gameplay is such a wide
there's
thing,
gonna be
right?
a variety of aspects.
Yeah.
Each one has their own ways to customize the characters. Well, let's just start with what they both have in common. Very typical JRPG type things. Weapons, armor, accessories. In this way, they both function effectively the same. Where they differ is the way you can customize your characters outside of that initial bit of gear. In the case of Chrono Trigger, it's very limited because all you really have are the magic tabs and the strength tabs, which isn't a lot.
Right.
Whereas Final Fantasy VI has the level up Esper setup and teaching characters magic.
Yeah, I totally agree with that.
It is
totally
a fundamentally way more customizable setup. No, I don't necessarily think that makes it better or worse, but it does make it interesting to try to compare the two because they really are going for way different things.
No, I totally agree. And honestly, the other side of it is when you're talking about Chrono Trigger and talking about Final Fantasy, I think mechanically Final Fantasy VI is a much better game than Chrono Trigger, because of exactly what you said. You have much more control over your party builds than you do in Chrono Trigger. Now, for a role-playing game, an RPG, that kind of goes back to what you're there for. If you're there for character customization, for party control, hey, I want a party full of white mages, hey, I want to do a run that's all thieves, or whatever, right? Not saying you can do jobs like you could in Final Fantasy V or 3. Yeah, you couldn't do jobs, but in Final Fantasy, you build your characters based off of what the espers they equip, and what espers they equip will not only let them teach certain magic, but it'll also give them the ability certain boosts upon leveling. People kind of forget that about the esper system. It's not just learning magic; it's also about your boosts. So and your buffs as you level. That is a very interesting. It's not a perfect system because it reduces the amount of all your characters end up being the same at the end. If you're like me, you just grind everybody to the highest level, and all your characters are basically the same with the exception of their special ability. And it is very more straightforward, it's just magic, but you have that control, where in Chrono Trigger, you have no control. Your characters just level like they do in 4 or 2. Final Fantasy 4, your characters, you don't buy magic in Final Fantasy 4. You just, as your characters increase in level, they learn new things. It's exactly how Chrono Trigger works. As your characters level, they learn new things. So mechanically, Chrono Trigger is a very simple RPG. It's RPG, Jimmy's first RPG. It's very simple mechanically.
I'm a little torn in relation to how they do it with Final Fantasy VI, because again, I do have that issue with you. They do kind of start to become the same, and I love the individualized abilities each character has. They were not all created equal.
No.
I love Strago. I love the idea of blue magic. I can't find a good reason for most of those blue magic spells over spells you can just learn off your espers.
It's funny. People always tell me blue magic is where it's at, and I am the opposite. I don't like it because it's so much time tax to figure this stuff out, and if it's not wildly better, then it's not worth it for me. That's why, I'll be honest, Final Fantasy VI, you could do without Gao. You can just Gao.
I hate not having control of characters.
I don't. Thank you. I don't like characters going to berserk. I don't like Gao as a cat. I think he's annoying. I don't like the fact he just says Gao 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 Gao. I'm very anti-Gao.
I do like some of the bits, like the Mr. Thou bit gets a kick out of me still.
Yeah, Mr. Thou is good. Just give me a Moogle. I'm happy with Moogles. Give me a Moogle. We got Moogles. We don't need a Gao. Gao is. And the idea of wandering around the veldt, jumping into things to learn their abilities that are completely random, you don't know what it is.
The thing, I like the idea. I don't like the execution.
I agree. That's a very good point. And I know people use blue magic and other. It's one of those things I'm trying to explore more. I'm actually in the process of replaying all the Final Fantasy games for my podcast, and I'm on Final Fantasy V right now. I just started that a couple days ago, and that's got a lot of blue magic in it. There's a whole class just for blue magic, and from what I've read, it's like you got to learn blue magic. That's where it's at. And I'm like, gotta sit here and wait for this guy to get hit by a spell to learn the dumb spell, and I'm sitting here.
Look, the only
Can I
Final
just buy
Fantasy I
it?
think where your blue magic's even that good is 9.
Mm.
And I don't know how to feel about that because it's the weird frog thing.
I've never played 9, so that 9 is one of my holes in my Final Fantasy ing. So once I'm done with 5, I'm gonna play 8 and 9 because I've played the 6 and 7 quite a bit as we're discussing. But anyway, yeah. I just think when it comes just getting back to the conversation of
Yeah.
Chrono Trigger versus Final Fantasy in that realm, I just think mechanically. Now I do love, and I will say absolutely love the tech system in Chrono Trigger. The idea of combining techs is really fun and freeing. Again, it's limited because you don't have much control, but you do have the control over who in your party you bring with you. The problem is, and I wish you could do this, if you could swap out characters on demand. If you didn't have to go all the way back to the end of time to change your characters out in Chrono Trigger. If you could just do that on the fly and then really experiment within a battle or even within an area, that would be awesome.
I could
Awesome.
understand
Now,
not doing it mid battle because I'm like,
right,
okay, that
totally.
would murder any semblance of difficulty in this game.
In a game that's not very hard at its outset. Chrono Trigger is not a challenging game. And it's actually very well paced. You don't really need to do much grinding. It's a very well paced game where
No,
Final Fantasy should grind a little bit to make your life easier.
I will say that in the case of Final Fantasy VI, though, I don't like how long it is before you even know there's Esper leveling bonuses.
Oh, they never
The
tells you. They
first
never
time
tell
that you
you.
play that game, you're not going to know unless you read up on
Nope.
it.
Nope. It doesn't tell you anywhere. I don't even think it tells you in the manual.
Yeah.
That's not what the Espers do. Nope.
Oh.
There's no. It's one of those things you have to discover. Like, wait, what do these little pluses mean in the menu?
Well, it does
Oh.
tell you. It's just it's so long before you actually even get espers, and the
Right.
first ones you look at don't even have that.
Right, you're right. They don't. You just equip them for magic, so you figure okay, and then you get the newer ones, and it has different buffs per level.
Then you're like, wait, am I limiting how strong I am now because of this? Yes, you are.
Yeah. Yes, you are. Yep, you have given in to randomness.
There's also
Uh,
that certain character abilities, when you find out how they technically function, it makes no sense. For example, Sabin, one of my favorite characters. I love the blitzes. You look at his stats, you look at what he's doing, you're like, alright, I'm gonna want to boost up his strength abilities. Nope, they're all magic based, except for two
Yep.
of them.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. And there's no great way of increasing that stat except for just pure just leveling and your standard stuff. But you're right. There's not a great way to increase that.
There's
Where
no way to
in
know,
Chrono Trigger-
though. That's the problem.
Right. There's no way to know. Yeah, that's true. There
You
is.
have to
You really
look
don't have.
outside the game to find that out. I was so mad. I was like, I've been building him wrong the whole time.
It's still in that mode of, hey, the better weapon makes my guy more better. You know, it's kind of that
Yeah.
vibe. Where you do have a point in Chrono Trigger, you do have the tabs that you can put into those stronger characters for magic or strength, depending on what they need a boost on. So you do have a little more control in that regard.
You're not going to accidentally screw up one of your characters, even with the tabs, because they are kind of a minor point.
Yeah, they're just plus oneing, and let's be honest, they're not adding that much to it. Neither
Technically, you're
games-
right.
Yeah, well,
I will make
Heck.
the caveat. One time I decided to try a run a Chrono Trigger. I'm going to use Robo as my healer. You know what happens if you give him all of your magic tabs?
nothing.
His group heal on his own is doing more than any of the dual tech heals.
Really? How interesting.
I don't think they realized someone might just give Robo all the magic tabs because his abilities scale quicker, I think. Whatever the formula
Interesting.
is, he's a
Because it's not really
monster of a healer.
Because these are not really a magic. It's a tech. It's not a magic per se. It's a shadow tech, I think, right?
No,
Is it
I don't
cons-
think that
is it
one's
considered
given
a
a type.
Okay, so yeah, right. So it's interesting.
Because
I never
Robo is
would've
one of
thought
the
that.
interesting ones, like, because he's one of the few characters that doesn't have a type,
Right.
but his attack is one of his techs is shadow based. He's got a fire based one and a lightning based one.
But those are dual techs, right? Though, right?
No,
Oh no. Oh, you're right. Yeah, you're right. Thank you.
it's just you don't really use them much because he's not a magic dude. He can just hit a variety of elements, which comes in handy. But typically, he's there to take a punch to the face or smash someone in the face, or
Yes.
apparently do a full party full heal because why not? So those tabs can make a huge difference if you use them right. But if you use them wrong, you're not going to screw anybody up. So that's kind of why, overall, I once again give the edge to Trigger here.
Yeah,
I'd give it to 6 if the unique abilities of different characters mattered more by the game's end. But so many of them just don't.
Well, and that's the side of it too with Chrono Trigger is Chrono Trigger character-wise, we can go into characters. Chrono Trigger, I think, has one of the best casts of any RPG I've ever played, as far as just base casts. Of course, Final Fantasy VI, I think, it ends up with, I think, 16 playable characters, maybe 20. I don't either 16 between 16 and 20 playable characters. We're not counting
13.
General Leo. Is it only 13?
Well, because, last level, or the giant tower, you split into your 3 different parties. 3 parties of 4. If you have everybody, you got 1 guy left over. Or was it 2?
No, it's 3. 3 parties of 4, so it'll be...
Yeah, 12 people there. Then you either have 1 or 2 left over if you've gotten everybody.
If you got all the secret characters, good call. Because can you have Shadow in the final?
Yes.
In the World of Ruin, you can, right? Yeah, you can get Shadow back. So, but regardless, let's just say even double the characters then, which that makes sense. Most of the characters, or I would say not most, I would say 40% of the characters in Final Fantasy VI are completely useless, and you never have to worry about them unless you're a completionist, and you don't want any dead weight on in those levels of dungeons where you have to split up and create multiple teams. Every character in Chrono Trigger is of import and has a good story, good backstory, has genuine character and characteristics. I'm sorry, I don't care about Realm. Why should I care about Realm? It's the World of Ruin. I'm looking for Terra. I want to care about Realm. Go home, Realm and Strago. No one should care about you two. No one cares.
I like
no
Strago.
one should care.
I really like Strago.
I like him in concept.
I just don't like Realm.
No, Realm's useless. Gao's useless. Even the secret characters like Umaro. Umaro's pretty useless. I mean, unless you really need a heavy hitter, like a big old tank. But
he's basically there to just kind of fill out your parties.
Yeah, and Gogo is pretty cool, but Gogo's just a blank slate character. You just equip him with whatever. It's pretty fun.
Yeah, you can swap out other characters' abilities, which is nice, but he can't equip Espers, so his stats are always going to lag behind everybody. But he's very versatile with a lot of abilities that aren't very good.
Yeah, you just use him to mimic throw Ultima, then he mimics Ultima. So you have 2 Ultimas. Perfect. Yeah, I mean, again, the characters in Final Fantasy VI are great, but there are too many. It's a bit of a bloated cast. Whereas Chrono Trigger, each person in Chrono Trigger, that cast is very important. The funny thing is, the least interesting character in Chrono Trigger is Chrono. Because Chrono is you. You are Chrono. It's an unvoiced protagonist, so you are meant to be Chrono.
The silent protagonist is an interesting art.
Yes.
Some games do it well, like Chrono.
I agree with that. I think it does a fine job with it. I would say if you want to talk about main character versus main character, I think most people would say that Terra is the main protagonist of Final Fantasy VI. I mean, you can make some arguments for Locke or for Cells.
Throw me in the camp that I don't know if I'd even say it has a main character.
I've heard this argument, and I do agree to a point. I think I would say Terra. If you had to pick one, it would be Terra.
It would be her.
The story hinges on her so much. But you're right. It's a very ensemble.
Yeah, like the initial trigger for the The initial trigger for the story in Final Fantasy VI requires Terra.
Right.
Once you've hit the War of the Magi, though, that importance kind of goes away.
Yeah. Now it's a team going against a final boss, or a final threat. Yeah. No, it's very fair. Chrono is again, as a player character, as a player surrogate, the unvoiced protagonist. Again, they do a very good job with it because they really want you to feel like you are Chrono, and I think it's effective in that way. But it also doesn't make for a very compelling central character. Everything else around Chrono is extremely interesting and good, and all those characters around Chrono are extremely interesting and good. But Chrono itself, it's kind of like Zelda, like Link. Is Link inherently interesting? Only as interesting as you are as a human being. Basically it. Yeah. Everything around Link is very interesting, and Link allows you to enjoy the interesting stuff. And Chrono does the exact same thing. Very well.
That said, is a little something against Trigger. It's one of those games, like, once you've gone back to it multiple times, you realize how easy it is to ignore the dual and triple text system in that game.
Oh, yeah. You don't. there's literally like 3 dual texts that you really should know. Like your party should always have Ayla in it. I think it's like I forget what's the one where Chrono throws her in a straight line, or no, Ayla throws Chrono in a straight line. Like that thing just wrecks constantly. It's been a while since I've done a Chrono Trigger run. Yeah, a lot of those dual and triple texts especially, they are more for show and for fun than anything else. But that's a good thing. I think that's actually fine. You know?
Like, if you know to give Chrono your magic tab, or not Chrono, Robo your magic tabs, healing's entirely covered without dual techs.
That's amazing.
Chrono's good enough as a physical attacker on his own.
Mm-hmm.
Just take either Luca or, if you want a variety, Magus, since he has all the different elements.
Mm-hmm.
You never need to use a dual tech in that game.
No, you really don't. You really don't. Yeah.
Again, it's kind of the same issue once you really get into Final Fantasy VI.
Mm-hmm.
A ways in, everyone's unique abilities kind of become eh.
I mean, once you get to a certain point in any RPG, it's everything kind of starts min-maxing out. Like you just kind of like starts leveling out a bit, right?
Yeah.
I think both Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy suffer from the same situation. But again, when you give people that player expression to like completely build their characters and level, at a certain point, it's all a wash at some point. But
yeah. One thing I will note against Final Fantasy VI, and this isn't so much a problem with the game itself, but it's something time has done to this game. Like, for me and you, we played this back in the day. Like, we picked this up, we didn't know what we were getting into with Final Fantasy VI.
No.
We go through, we fight this goofy little clown motherfucker. You want to punch him in the face, but he's Gestal's lapdog, basically. He's the guy that the main bad is sending at you.
Right.
And then the World of Ruin happens. It is so ubiquitous now that Kefka is the villain of Final Fantasy VI. Like, I don't even feel like it's a spoiler to say it at this point.
No, it really isn't, I don't think.
All promotional material that they swear themselves releases that has anything to do with Final Fantasy VI, it's kind of obvious Kefka's the villain. That World of Ruin twist is never going to have the impact on people coming to play this game.
That's a very good... I mean, if someone was coming in blind, like completely had never read a single thing about the game, I think Kefka's interesting because Kefka is always the in-your-face antagonist, even when he's just, like you said, the lapdog of Gestalt. That's the right name, right? I'm very bad with names. So Gestalt, thank you. But Kefka's the one that's your irritant. Kefka is an irritant until Kefka is a problem. And Kefka becomes a serious problem in the World of Ruin when he moves the statues around and gets that ultimate power. So now you have this unhinged clown with ultimate power. So you have the ultimate irresponsible villain who's just, he's a mustache twirling villain with no redeeming qualities other than he's really fun to be around. He's got his goofy clown guy who now has ultimate power. So what happens when you give someone who's unhinged, goofy, and kind of reckless ultimate power? He does goofy, reckless, nonsensical things with ultimate power, which is a very scary thought. Like, there's the idea of a big bad who's chaotic bad and uncontrollable and unpredictable bad is a very scary idea. The idea that he could just get a wild hair up his ass and destroy Mobliz. Okay, poof. Mobliz is gone. Why? I don't know. I'm chaotic bad. In Chrono Trigger, it's much more. Lavos is like a world-defeating entity. I'm trying to think of a cosmic terror, basically.
I would describe Lavos as more of a force of nature.
Okay.
You're not fighting a malevolent force. You're not fighting some evil plan. You're fighting an earthquake, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. You're fighting an eventuality. Yeah, you're trying to stop a volcano. Almost like a literal volcano, I guess, if you put the name. But yeah, it's always like I always thought it was like a cosmic terror, but that's a good way of describing him too. I really think, and in that regard, Final Fantasy does that a lot too. Like Sin, Sin in Final Fantasy X, that's a cosmic terror. That's just this kind of eventuality. You're fighting against premonitions. You're fighting against premonitions. You're fighting against prophecies, and you're trying to stop the unstoppable. The thing that's supposed to happen, where with Kefka, you're fighting the unknown. You're fighting this random being that has this ultimate power. For me, fighting randomness is always going to be scarier than fighting the eventual. that might be a personal thing, and you could probably argue both sides. But for me, the idea of I don't know what's going to happen is a little scarier than inevitability.
This is inevitably how I look at Final Fantasy VI. Like, at the World of Ruin, you've lost.
Yeah.
Kefka won.
Mm-hmm.
The world is in tatters. You're not really fighting to save the world anymore. You're fighting to move past the despair. Final Fantasy VI is, at its core, how far can you push a narrative of hope versus despair?
Mm-hmm.
You can't get in a worse situation than the world of Final Fantasy VI after Kefka.
No.
That's rock bottom.
Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. Yeah.
Chrono Trigger, like, they could have stayed home and they wouldn't have seen Lavas. Their kids wouldn't have seen Lavas. Even their grandkids wouldn't have been at Lavas. Chrono Trigger is about fighting for the future. Fighting for, like, not even just yours, like the future of the world around. Trying to make everything better for everyone. Lava's kind of being just the epitome of just, fuck you.
Lavos is, Lavos is the world destroying threat, that everyone fears is going to happen. Lavos is the apocalypse, essentially, that drives us into the dark ages. But again, it's like this eventuality. It's this cosmic force that's going to happen. Where again, in Kefka is just a crazy person that's making things happen. And I think that's where the big difference is. And I think it's actually scarier, the idea for me personally, of somebody actively destroying the world through recklessness and just literally psychotic behavior than the world naturally destroying itself thanks to a volcano or earthquake or something like that happening.
Yeah, I give it to you. Kefka's the better than Lavas.
Oh yeah, and Kefka's just so much fun. Kefka's just so much fun to be around and experience. Kefka's very likable in all of his madness and murder and poisoning of waters.
He's a pro wrestling heel. That's what Kefka's a pro wrestling heel.
He really is. That's a great way of putting it. He's a pro wrestling heel. Yes, that's a very good way of putting it.
He makes me so mad, but he is so funny.
He's so fun. He's a great villain. Oh, that's very good. Very good. So I think we can give that point to Final Fantasy VI about antagonists. Kefka, and that's hard to beat because Kefka is probably one of the best role-playing RPG antagonists. Definitely in Final Fantasy, maybe in RPGs.
He may not be a deep character. He is not.
Nope.
But I think because of the themes of Final Fantasy VI, someone is out of their mind with power and insanity as Kefka. It's a perfect villain for it.
It's perfect. And I actually did an episode on my podcast about Final Fantasy VI. And that was one of the questions that I'd raised to a couple of my guests. And the question was, is Kefka a good villain? Because, just like you said, he's not complex. He's very one-noted. He's evil for evil's sake. He wants power. Is he what you would traditionally call a good antagonist? And what most people landed on was, yes, he may not be a good villain, but he's a good antagonist.
Yeah.
He's a good thing to fight against. He's excellent friction for the story. Even if he's not the most complex villain with complex emotions or complex moralities, that's not who Kefka is.
A one-note villain can work in the right context.
Yes, in the right context. And as an agent of chaos and change, Kefka is marvelous, and he's so much fun to be around and experience, which makes it all the more satisfying when you finally triumph over him. It feels so good because he is set up as this really great, again, chaotic villain. Because Final Fantasy VI is really more about those stories of the people and the world itself, not so much the villain, where Chrono Trigger, it's more about characters, your central party of characters. Lavos, very similar to Kefka, is this kind of inciting antagonist. And Lavos, you can make some parallels too, because Lavos doesn't have any strong motivations. Lavos has less motivations. It's just his job. It's his job to wake up in the year 1999.
An interplanetary parasite. That's all Lavos is.
It's all he is. He's just a disease. He's the pandemic. He's just coming on in. There's no, Lavos, you probably could even say has any motivations. He's just like an earthquake.
Yeah.
It's so which makes Chrono Trigger, its central core is really are those characters, your surrounding cast and the world around, and of course the time travel and how people react to this as opposed to the thing itself.
That's it. Both are great antagonists. I won't lie.
Oh, totally. Yeah,
Like, it's weird because we're comparing two games that if I'm being honest, both games have very few flaws.
Yeah, we're talking, banger against banger. I mean, let's be honest here. This is not but this makes for a good conversation because hey, these are as a podcast I like has said a number of times, tall buildings cast long shadows, So the tall those Triumph games often cast these long shadows where the little things are what matter. Like the little things are the things that are going to separate them. So, and we're talking about two giants.
One thing I'll say, not because it's related to any of these two games specifically, in the case of Chrono Cross, the sequel, one stupid little detail I love about that game I see nobody talk about, you can't name Surge Chrono.
Can't name Surge...
Chrono.
Surge? Really?
The main character. Pull up your copy of Chrono Cross. When you name Surge, name him Chrono. It won't let you do it.
Oh, how interesting. I didn't even think about that.
I just tried it one time back when the game came out. We're like, it was Chrono in the last game. Let's name Chrono. It's like, it just won't let you make the selection.
That's interesting. I never even thought of doing it.
Another thing that I think is actually somewhat interesting to point out about these, like, we both agree these are like two of the best games on this system. I don't think the best way to play them is on the Super Nintendo.
Oh, 100% agree for both.
Like
100%.
For Final Fantasy VI, or my way I prefer to play is there was the revised old school edition that got made. They'd essentially taken the best aspects of the Game Boy Advance script, the Super Nintendo script, like the parts that were most accurate to the original, and some of the aspects of one of the more direct translations that existed before to kind of create a like fully fleshed script that was a lot more accurate to the original. And because you're dealing with emulation, you don't have the cartridge limitations that we had at the time. So the script was the best.
Yeah, I've never played it. I might want to try that for my series. That'd be kind of cool.
It removed all the censorship from the Nintendo release.
Oh, wow.
So all that's out. And it fixed the copious amounts of bugs with Final Fantasy VI.
Yeah, it's got a fair share.
Like, look, if you released Final Fantasy VI as it was released on the Super Nintendo today, no one would bat an eye because that's just how buggy games are these days.
Yeah.
But for the time it came out, that was a ridiculous amount of bugs.
For sure. What's the name of that fan hack? I want to check it out.
Revised Old School Edition. Now, I'm going to be one of the people that say I don't like the pixel remaster because I think the sprites look like crap. They're all washed out looking. Don't like looking at it.
I haven't played 6 yet on the Pixel remaster. I'm playing all the old ones. Just to kind of if you like Final Fantasy, I'm very soon embarking on it'll probably be a 6-month series. So I'm gonna play every Final Fantasy. I'm gonna do an episode on every Final Fantasy game, all the main numbered ones. I'll probably do some side episodes on the smaller ones, like if I get content. And just in case you're unaware, my show is basically a oral history of games through the thoughts and recollections of the people who lived it. So it's all about people's stories around games. So every main episode will have up to 12 different people on it. Think of it like a Ken Burns documentary where you have different people chiming in with different topics. And I'm going to do one for every single game. And some of the games are going to be like at least 2 or 3 episodes. 6 will be 3 episodes. That'll be a month of Final Fantasy 6. So if you like Final Fantasy, starting in hopefully end of October, November, you'll start seeing the Final Fantasy series start. I did a similar thing with Zelda. I finished that a few months ago. I spent 6 months doing every Zelda game. So I've not played 6 on the remasters yet. So you're saying it's kind of washed out and you're not a fan of it.
I don't like how the pixel art looks. Some of the backgrounds look really good. Some of them, like the opera, for the background for the battle, they added a lot more details and scenery, but it weirdly doesn't look as good as the more limited view, so the backdrops are a bit hit and miss. Then there was a couple things that got altered, I don't know if you knew this about the Game Boy Advance version, but the whole scene with Celis in the dungeon, they cut out the bit of the guard hitting her.
Oh, really?
Yeah. There was something going on in Japan at the time, so they felt it was a little insensitive, so that got cut from the Game Boy Advance version. They kept that removed for the Pixel remaster, and then they felt all the soldiers doing the one-armed raise was a little too...
Yeah,
so they altered
okay.
But come on, it's the Empire's villains.
I mean, it's okay. We don't have to. That's a little.
So those sprites got changed a bit, and that kind of got me worried, like, okay, what else got changed? Because I'm not a big fan of the pixel remaster for 6.
Interesting. Yeah, I haven't tried it, so I was gonna kind of run through like the first couple hours just to get my feel. But I'm definitely gonna try this other version, this fan one.
Similarly,
For
the Breath of Fire 2 fan translation, so good. Breath of Fire 2 probably got a lot more bone than Final Fantasy 6 did on its translation.
And then Chrono Trigger, I think the best version to play for me is the DS one.
Oh, definitely.
I think by far it's the only way to play it. Hey, but you know, what's the worst one? I'm gonna try to find a list of the worst Final Fantasy 6 translation because there's been so many of them.
I don't know what the worst one would be.
All right, so what do you think? What do you think the worst one would be, according to the internet and the people in the world?
Of any official translation?
Of the officials, yeah, the officials,
not like the... I have to say the original was probably the worst.
You mean the first original Super Nintendo?
For the English translation of all the...
Yeah.
Well, all the versions of 6, that one was the worst. If you're looking at all the Final Fantasy games, Final Fantasy 4, hands down.
Oh, yeah.
I love the translation. Okay, there was this thing online. I will see if I can find it and send it to you. It was called Final Fantasy IV, the Power of Cheese. They did it like a playthrough, but it was like really old, so it's like not a video. It was just like text from the like just screenshots of the playthrough with like text beneath. Every time an old person in that game dies or is severely injured, you get a new ship or an upgrade to a ship. There's this weird way Cecil has in just the original English translation, Cecil has a way of turning every conversation to be about him.
Yes. Oh, Cecil's so good. I loved Cecil in Final Fantasy IV.
He was great.
He's so great. It's fantastic.
My favorite line, or like my favorite 2 lines from that English translation, "You spoony bard."
Ah, yes, you spoony bard.
Or a random orc or dwarf child who just goes, "Do you have an ogrish one?" That's it. There's nothing else in that conversation. It's like, what?
That's all you need. What else do you need other than ogrish one?
Oh, that was such a bad translation. Good game despite that.
According to this article, the worst version of Final Fantasy VI was the PlayStation version.
Oh, yeah. I forgot about that.
That's the one. That's the not great.
It has nothing to do with the translation, and it's the same thing with Chrono Trigger, because we got that one. The loading times were awful, and I don't know how you had bad loading times for a port of a Super Nintendo game on the PlayStation.
It's beyond acceptance. The mobile versions aren't much better. So, but yeah. So I don't know where we were in our. We got a far field.
I think we covered like all major aspects of the 2 games.
Probably. Well, there's one that we didn't capture that's vitally important, which is the soundtrack.
Oh yeah.
We've not talked about the music of 6 versus Chrono Trigger, which is so freaking hard. Where do you land on the soundtrack?
Look, man, 6 has Dancing Mad.
Good point.
That wins it. If I'm just comparing the best song from each game, we got Dancing Mad from Chrono Trigger, Frog theme from Dancing Mad from Final Fantasy VI, Frog theme from Chrono Trigger. Both of which sound excellent as a metal song.
I'm sure they do. Yeah, I'm sure they do. I think I had to give it to Chrono Trigger very slightly, simply because I have listened to both soundtracks. I won't say extensively, but I'm working. I'll put 1 or 2 of them on. Chrono Trigger is one I go to often when I'm just working and need something in the background. I'll put on the Chrono Trigger soundtrack, and the various themes are so varied and emotive that they stand up on its own. I think as a soundtrack, if you've never played either game and just listened to the music out of context, I think Chrono Trigger's compositions are just a little better, a little more timeless, separated from the game that it's in, just as pieces, than Final Fantasy VI. And this is coming from somebody who loves the Final Fantasy VI soundtrack.
I can agree with that.
I think that's what would win it for me on Chrono Trigger.
I'll take because the point for Chrono Trigger.
I'm gonna give it to you. I know I'm a terrible public defender for Final Fantasy VI. My Final Fantasy VI defendant, he's really good. But boy, oh boy, Kingdom of Zeal, the music of Kingdom of Zeal is.
It's a band called Mega Driver that did the 2 different metal versions of Chrono Trigger songs. You have the Frog theme and the Black Wind Howls Again.
Nice.
The Black Wind Howls is... I think the metal version is better.
I mean, the Millennial Fair music is perfect for what it is. Like, what better music for a carnival or a fair than the Millennial Fair music? Last year I was in Iowa for 4th of July. Went to this like carnival, like it was in West Des Moines, like a little town carnival. It was adorable, quaint, and I'm like, you know what make this better? the music from the Millennial Fair. That would make this better. It's just fantastic. So yeah, I think Chrono Trigger wins it for me for the soundtrack because again, it just stands on its own, separated from the game.
Yeah, where I just edge it out with 6, if only because just Dancing Mad is that good.
Dancing Man, it's very, very good. I think that might be all of it. We didn't really get into story too much. We kind of did though, I guess, with gameplay.
Yeah.
We kind of talked about
different
story,
aspects of the story.
the writing. Yeah, writing. I don't know. Is there anything else you think? I mean, there's so many things you can pick apart and dissect with these two games. You could do a month on Final Fantasy VI, which I'm probably going to do for my show. But yeah.
I mean, we could just sit here and shake our old man canes about how much better the games were back in our day.
Yes, yes. Dag nabbit. It was an active time system. I ain't need no Devil May Cry Final Fantasy 16 nonsense. There's too many damn buttons. I don't know how to make these combinations work.
I will say, like, on a slightly serious note related to that, I do think there was something to, like, games from these older generations having more limitations, forcing people to actually have to think, like, within those confines and come up with creative ways to do stuff.
Absolutely.
That does not exist anymore.
No, it really doesn't. It's games, and then back in my day, again, Cranky Kong is my spirit animal, by the way, just so you know. I have on one of my Discord servers that I have a patron of a podcast called Gamers Week, and they give you a custom emote or custom emote when you join. I made mine Cranky Kong because that's me. I am a Cranky Kong.
Oh, I have an entire series of articles I write. I just titled "Old Man Yells at Clouds."
That's it. That's it. That's exactly it. That's it. But anyway, so I lost my train of thought there for a minute. Yeah, so just the idea that back in the olden days when you didn't have as much ability to do things, you had to create those creative solutions, and you had to do that for everything, not just for visuals, right? We think about visuals, right? Well, of course, you can't have crazy cutscenes and crazy lighting effects and ray tracing in 1995. That wasn't a thing. However, even more than that, dialogue had to be condensed in a certain way. The way a game's paced has to be done in a certain way to allow for limitations, to allow for large worlds that feel large but are reality very small in size and in dimensions. How do you handle verticality? How do you handle making a dungeon feel vertical as opposed to just a series of horizontal squares? You make them smaller as you go up. All these choices people had to make to create this immersive world with very little resources is mind-blowing, and the reason it holds up today is because it was done with such craft and care and intentionality. Where in a mod like a Final Fantasy 16, I haven't played Final Fantasy. I played the demo. I did not buy the full thing. With Final Fantasy 16, everything's very beautiful and all these resources to spend. Nothing I saw in Final Fantasy 16, the demo, had any sort of impact like Final Fantasy 6 did or Chrono Trigger. Very different because I played those as a kid, but yeah, I think it's well observed in that the older 16-bit RPGs really had to do a lot with very little because their ambitions were larger than the technology allowed. As opposed to now just having a big vision and achieving it, I think that extra care really makes those games extremely special.
Another small bit that a lot of people these days don't realize it, with how they had to design the visuals of their games. I only learned about this because of the early days of emulation. Games looked weird when you would emulate them on PC at first, and it took people a while to figure out why, because it had these weird stretches and curves. Everything was made because of how the CRTVs back then were curved.
Yes.
They had to get made to fit and look good on those weird curved-ass TVs.
Yeah, that's a great point. That's a great point. Absolutely.
So emulators had to adjust for that. So, the end of the day, I do think Chrono Trigger is the better game of the two. If I'm being entirely honest, Final Fantasy VI is only my third favorite Super Nintendo RPG, behind Breath of Fire 2.
For me, I'm here on behalf of Final Fantasy VI, representing the great game. Final Fantasy VI is a game I personally like more. I think I have more of an emotional connection to it. It was one of those moments in gaming for me where I looked at that opening of the Magitech armor slowly marching towards Narshe with that snow falling and the music and the credits, thinking, oh God, this is never going to get better. It was one of the first video game stories I connected with and characters I connected with because I was just old enough to really start emotionally investing and relating to these characters. And Chrono Trigger was a little bit down the line. It was probably I play that later, probably maybe a couple years later, depending when it was released, because 6 was released before Chrono Trigger. So I personally like Final Fantasy 6 more, maybe because it's a little more traditional, and not as much action RPG. But I think if you look at it objectively through those main things, the only thing I think you can really say Final Fantasy VI does better is mechanics. I think it's a deeper RPG.
And because you brought it up, Final Fantasy VI had a stronger opening.
Oh yeah. Oh
That
I
opening
mean,
scroll about the Magitech War, the marching monstrous
Yeah.
machines into the city through the snowscape,
yes.
that was a much stronger opening.
Final Fantasy Chrono Trigger is lots of fun, and it's fun and adorable, but no, Final Fantasy VI is just, this is no joke. This is no joke. There's no screwing around in the beginning of Final Fantasy VI. You are in, and you're in for it. So
When
yeah,
you're in the
I think
realms of like some of the greatest games ever made, just
Yeah,
flip
I mean,
a coin.
yeah, I mean, we're comparing legend against legend. This is not, and also because Chrono Trigger did have an extra year on it. They made some changes. They learned that random encounters are not that fun if you don't have to have them. You play a game that you can avoid encounters or see them coming, at least for the most part sometimes.
Until my dying day, I still like random encounters.
You and I are men of a similar ilk. I like random encounters. I've never understood. People hate them. I understand. I think it adds tension to general exploration. I think there's something cool about being kept on your toes.
And when it's so easy in some games to just avoid all of the counters, I'm like, why is there even a dungeon here? There's
Right.
no reason to have these guys. Just let me walk up. Just let me push a button to trigger an encounter. That's basically what I'm doing with how some of them are set up.
That's true.
I've been
That's a good point.
replaying Dragon Quest XI. I have some issues. I should have done it in the 2D mode.
No, I agree to a certain point with random encounters. I don't have a serious problem with them. I never have, and I understand people don't like them because it does interrupt the flow of your game. You're doing the same thing over and over again. But at the end of the day, you're really just gonna go through them pretty quick if you're blowing through it quick. And if you're going through an area and you feel like you're constantly getting random encounters that are going too quick, you should probably move on and go someplace else. You're a little too overpowered for this. You may
There
want to
are
move on.
certainly
Anyway.
some areas of some games where the rates need to be tweaked a little bit.
Oh, totally. Oh, listen, there's no question about that. Yes.
I remember
There's
some
no
issues
question.
with the moon in Final Fantasy IV. I'm like, oh god, how am I still
Jesus.
getting fights?
Oh,
I am in a small hallway. How am I on my fourth fight?
oh, the moon in 4 is tough. And the final boss, I should know the name of it because like
Zemus and Zeramus.
Zemus and Zeramus. That difficulty spike to Zemo and Zeramus is ridiculous. That last boss of Final Fantasy IV locked me for a loop. I was like, oh man, I'm getting wrecked like I have not yet in this game, and I did a decent amount of grinding.
I was not expecting to talk Final Fantasy IV's final boss, but
I'm sorry.
it cheated.
I'm sorry.
No, this is.
Oh.
I didn't realize until the DS remake what was going on in the original fight. Because in the DS remake, when you hit him, it'll say counter Big Bang. It's like, oh, he's
Right.
countering with that. That was happening in the Super Nintendo version. That's why you get hit with so many big bangs, is it's triggering as a counter. It just doesn't indicate that's what's happening. The fight's
Right.
hard because it doesn't tell you how it works. The moment you realize that fight's a breeze.
Yeah,
Because you
then
just stop attacking with Kane. He's a
Right.
detriment in that fight.
yeah.
Well, I think that we've about exhausted any actual discussion comparing game to game.
I agree. It was a good discussion, though, I think.
Oh, yeah.
I think we covered a lot of ground.
So, yeah, for anyone who checks out this stream either here after we go off, it'll also go up on YouTube and Rumble. But yeah, so feel free to check out any of A Gamer Does 40 stuff. He has, 86 episodes of that podcast he years now?
Yeah, there's 80, I think episode 82 is coming out. Yeah, episode 82 main episodes. There's also a side show on the main feed called Tales from the Bargain Bin. That's kind of my 30-minute side show with me and my brother. We talk about the games we got from well-meaning family members.
And later on this month, the last Saturday of every month, is when me and Mildred do the Adventures of the Monk and the Monarch. You can hear us talking about the impact of the Record of the Lodos War. I will see you on whatever the next topic of the Tribunal is. I haven't found a guest and topic yet.